Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levitt. And if you enjoy the conversations, be sure to like, subscribe, follow where you're ever watching or listening. Also, if you or somebody you know would like to be on the show and chat with me, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My handle there is IsaacR11, or you can reach me on Mastodon. My handle there is IsaacR11 at faucedon.org. All right, I'm looking forward to this one. Let's just get right into it. My coffee is almost gone, so I'm kind of amped up. My guest today is my good friend, April Yoho. April, do you want to say hello, introduce yourself?
Hey, Isaac, thank you for having me. So I'm April Yoho. I work for a small tech company called GitHub, currently, having worked at Microsoft before, been a HashiCorp ambassador for many, many years, been in tech for over 25, and I'm based out of the UK.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. One, because it's always great to see you and chat with you. Like, we see each other out on the road all the time at shows, and it's just good to I have like your uninterrupted attention for like an hour, which I think is really, really exciting. But I don't know a lot about your history, and one of the things I'd love to get to figure out is how you got started. Like, when did you realize that technology was like the thing for you?
Yeah, it was accidental. I think
Sure.
it is for like most people. I work. I mean, look, being in our roles that we're in today, we work with a lot of people at conferences that are like, "How do I learn? How do I study in university?" I didn't have that. I actually started off in tech. Well, I think in the '80s, my parents had a computer, and I was getting yelled at to get off the computer.
Sure.
I was fortunate; my parents had a computer in the house because they both worked. Well, my mom had an office in the house. My dad worked nearby, so we had computers early on. So I got into a lot of trouble, like a lot of trouble, like running up bills when we had dial up internet, all that good stuff. And then when I went to high school, so I grew up in the US. And when I went to high school, I went to a high school actually on a basketball scholarship, but they had a computer art and science program. So in high school, I got to get A+ certified. They did internships and all sorts of stuff. And I got to like network the entire school. I did lots of hardware builds. I learned the hardcore nitty gritty build computers all the time. And I fell into it. And my dad goes, I think my dad just realized I was getting really bored in school. I was getting in trouble for cutting class. I probably shouldn't admit that out loud. Go to class, kids, don't skip class. But I was skipping class. I was bored. So they put me in this like hard computer class. And it was like your MCSE certification at the age of 15, 16. So I started doing all the networking, all the server builds, and it kept me semi out of trouble, not entirely. And then when I went to college, I studied to be a doctor. Um, when I went to school, like you could get a CS degree, but it was pretty much go to school and get a degree and get out,
Yeah.
or do something else. So for me, it was not tech. I did tech on the side to earn some income, had some part-time jobs. And when I graduated, I was going from one university to another one, to get ready for med school. And in that, I needed a job. So I applied for a job at Tufts University, worked in their IT department, got free tuition so I could do my master's. And I thought, I'll just do this for a couple years, figure out my life. I was like early 20s, just graduated university. And I love the job. And I think I just started fitting in better with people in tech than doctors. Like, I love medicine. I've studied to be a surgeon. I have papers published, but I just like the people in tech better. I love the job better. I love the freedom. And then I just stayed in it. And I was in my 20s, making money and not in debt. And med school would have put me in so much debt. And
Sure.
I just made the choice in tech, right? And then I just grew my career. I grew it while I lived in the US for many years. And then it took me over to the UK. And then I'm here now working for GitHub.
So, I mean, let's go way back, because you tossed something out nonchalantly, like basketball scholarship. All right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm curious, as somebody who played basketball, not the level to get scholarship, but I played a lot of basketball growing up. And so, what was like your definitive basketball skill? Were you quick? Could you shoot? Get some dribble? Like, what was it? What was the thing to? Because like, let's just not cast aside the fact that like getting a basketball scholarship is a non-trivial thing.
Yeah. It isn't. I don't like talking about it. I'm really shy about it, weirdly enough. So Isaac, you and I have met in real life. Like, am I tall?
I wasn't gonna lead with the fact that if anybody's met April in person, like the first thing you think of is competitive basketball player. That's definitely not.
No.
But no, I mean, let's be real. Like, there's been
Yeah,
players in the
sure.
NBA. Like, if you like basketball, like people are aware of Muggsy Bogues, like 5'3".
Logan's 5'3",
Yeah,
right?
right. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, like you didn't answer the question though. Like, what was
Okay.
your?
So I was a forward, a rebounding forward until the age of like 11. I was
Okay.
the tallest kid, and then I just
Yeah.
stopped. So for everyone out there, I'm 5'4". I was the tallest kid. I was an aggressive rebounder, but I could shoot as well, and I had really good ball handling skills. Where I was excelling was I'm still ambidextrous, so I could dribble and shoot with both hands
Mm,
really well.
yeah.
So because I stopped growing at the age of 10, 11-ish, they put me as point guard. So I was actually a shooting, driving point guard. I could still rebound, but I had mad shooting skills. I was the top scorer on the team, um, and I was fast. And because I was probably shorter than some of the girls, I could drive around them and I could drive to the goal pretty well. So I was a pretty aggressive point guard, shooting point guard.
I don't want to keep drilling into this, but so one thing that fascinates me about basketball specifically is if you tall early, you have an extreme advantage, and if you're not, or if you are tall than your peers and you're coordinated in basketball, you're basically like unstoppable. So you said you kind of early bloomer, you grew tall quick, right? How did
Mhm.
it feel, being the tallest kid and then slowly over the course of a few years become like one of the shorter kids?
And my body changed. Like our bodies changed. Like that's a
Sure.
realistic
Yeah, yeah.
human thing. I started getting muscle
Mm-hmm.
like as a kid. I was a pretty. I mean, I grew up playing sports. Like my dad was adamant we played sports. Um, and fun fact, and I didn't talk about this. Like I was junior Olympic skier as well. Like I was super athletic as a kid. And my body just changed. So going from being like the tallest kid to the shortest, I thought, oh, maybe I'll grow. Because the doctors were always like, oh, you're gonna be 5'7", 5'8". I was like, yes, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
I think for me, it caused a lot of insecurities as a female. Um, I because my body changed. Well, it's puberty anyways, like everything
Yeah.
changes.
Sure.
Um, I started getting muscles but I didn't know how to handle my body. So any photos of me as a teenager, I am wearing Jinkos. If we all remember Jinkos out
You just
there.
placed yourself in the chronological of like fads, right? Like, because
Yeah, I have
Jinkos was
photos
my
of
was my time too, right?
yeah.
I knew that we were of a similar age, but like the fact that you're like Jinkos, I'm like, oh yep, I know exactly
Yep.
that the
I
6
had
months where
Jinkos,
Jinkos is
I
really
had
cool. Yeah.
big baggy t-shirts, and I didn't know how to handle it. And I think as a teenager, you're always awkward. I kept playing sports. I was really strong, and I think the sports kept me grounded.
Hmm.
So I was still doing tech stuff. I was still going to school. I was still studying. But I was then like really focused on my sport. So I think that was probably the thing. But then I always see all these girls that looked prettier than me and always looked thinner than me. There's such a complex in our society. I think it's worse now with social media about like the way we should look. So as a teenager, I fought that a lot. I always felt like I was ugly duckling. I was short, stumpy. I didn't embrace my body as I probably should have. And I think hiding that was the way I dealt with it. And playing sports, I just kind of dealt with it growing up. But it's tough. It's tough being a teenager, boy or girl, or you know, um, any gender. It's tough. It's tough to find yourself.
Yeah, I've been talking about this a lot lately. I don't know why, but like, if you could put your current brain in like your 13, 14-year-old body, I think you'd be unstoppable. Like most people would be, right? And I the cliche phrase that I keep on using lately, and it's like been played to death, but like youth is wasted on the young, right?
Yeah.
Like, one of the things that like about me is that I love to run. And
Mhm.
like I was pretty good at track in high school, and I played a little, and I did a little bit in college, but I like literally never put any effort into it. And now that I have like some form of like discipline when it comes to running, like I remember I would complain in high school, it's like, oh, I gotta go out for like an 8 mile run. Like that's like the worst thing ever. Like I would
Yeah.
never. And I remember a coach told me, like I was an 800 runner, and my coach told me like, I want you to put in like 100 miles a week for the summer. And I literally looked at him and was like, nah, that's not gonna happen. Because I was, 15, 16, 17. Like I was like, oh, I'm gonna go hang out with my friends, and I'm gonna sit and play video games and do all sorts of non-productive things because it's the summer. And now I'm like, man, if I put in those, like, not 100, because I think that's a bit insanity, but if I put in like 60, miles a week when I was going into my senior year, I might have been very, very good. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, the long and short of it is that, yeah, I think one of the things that we do when we look back at our formidable years growing up, it's like, oh man, like if I just knew, it would be,
What I knew now.
yeah, I would be
Exactly.
so much, you think you'd be put yourself in a better position. But I think one of the things that I've found out is that all the decisions that we've made, like they were the right decisions, even if they really blew up on our faces. Um, that's not to say that you can make terrible decisions, but I think at the end of the day, if you mean well, like every decision is probably for a good one.
Yeah.
I,
And look, it leads us to where we are today. And I think youth is absolutely wasted on the young. But then I look at the decade I'm in now, and it's going to be my best decade. Like I'm
sure.
actually stronger now than I was then, because I am putting in the time and effort to train properly, take care of my body. I'm not 15, 16 going, oh, I'm going to drink Mountain Dew and eat a bag of Cheetos before I go for a 7 mile run,
Yeah.
which I used to do. Um, definitely. Now it's like, right, I'm going to have healthy foods, like peanut butter and banana, and
Yeah.
um, but I think this is, I think I'm in my best decade. Physically, mentally, and emotionally. Like I'm there. So
It's crazy. Like, I don't know if you've ever come across, like, you see pictures of people that are like our age, like late 30s, early 40s, whatever, and that are, like in the 70s, and they look like they're 65 years old. Like you look like it's absolutely wild to me that just like with a little bit of like better health care, a little bit of like better fashion, like people, like you see people like in their 70s now, and they're like, oh, like maybe that person's like 50. No, they're like
yeah,
72. Obviously not everybody gets hits the genes lottery, like some people age very fast, but it's crazy to me, like if you look, you know and the reason why I brought this up, you said like, best decade, like in your 40s or whatever, late
hmm
30s, 40s, like best time of your life. And it's like a lot of people that like, if you look back through history, it's like that's basically when it's over, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. And
people are
like that's
starting to
it. They have their
retire.
kids, and that was it.
Yeah. One
So
thing that you said too, which I really clicked into, is like, you were curious about like the how computers work from like a hardware perspective. Like I got my start, like I used to bother like the networking guy at my school, like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, what does that do? And like he
yep.
was very patient, and I think that's kind of what fed a lot of my interests. Like, was it a natural curiosity for you where it's like I just have to know how this thing works? Or was it kind of on the flip side where it's like it's something that you didn't understand and you needed to learn?
It was the curiosity for me, and I think the issue I had in school, a lot of kids have, is we're taught to take a test. We're
Sure.
not
Yeah, yeah,
taught
yeah.
to actually learn. I think that's one of the biggest problems we have in our educational systems across the globe. But I was just curious. I wanted to know more, and the more I got into something, because I can get really focused into things, get really into things, and I had that satisfaction of, oh, I built a thing. Like I used to love Lego. I used to love Connects as a kid and build roller coasters and all sorts of stuff, on like school breaks. And then there's like, oh, I'm building a computer. I got it to work and understanding how code works. So I just got more and more to it. I tried so many different things. Like I tried graphic design, and it really interested me. And I don't want to say I found it easy, but yes, easy to learn. And I just want
Hmm.
to keep learning more. So for me, it definitely snowballed. It was the interest in learning the new things and how it always changes. And you encountered new problems all the time. And that those are things that kind of kept me into it. And I had some interesting teachers along the way. Definitely had some interesting teachers, but some really good teachers that help kind of inspire you. But I think for me, a lot of it was self taught, as a lot of people are. And then the curiosity in the classroom, which got me into trouble, but also kept me learning. Um, it is what it is. I look back at those teachers now, and I'm like, see, I got in trouble and it paid off.
Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
No, it's I think what's interesting too about when you really find something that really scratches some itch like in your brain, it's really addictive, right? Like
yeah,
you're continually wanting to know more, and like it sounded like you had access to it, right? Like I think a lot of people, they struggled, you know, with, oh, I didn't have access to technology because we didn't have a computer in the
mhm,
house, or maybe my school wasn't as forthcoming with like recognizing the fact that I had this interest. Um, when like so you said as well that like you were gonna be a doctor, right? Like
yeah.
and whether that was like your choice or that was like the, oh, it'd be great if you were a doctor sort of influencing from family. I'm curious, as somebody to an extent like kind of changed their mind with their career path, what are some of the things that you recall from like doing pre-med or sort of area of focus from a study perspective? Is there anything that kind of correlates to when you were learning about technology?
I think so there's that's a two-folded answer. I'm going to answer that in two parts. One is when I was actually taking the courses for pre-med, my actual undergraduate degree is in applied mathematics,
Okay.
which definitely applies to algorithms. There's a lot of things you can do with that with technology, and you're using computers in a lot of those courses to do complex equations, and we used a lot of computers in our labs for like
Mm,
science and stuff. So we were touching technology. I went to a school that focused on engineering, technology, math, and science.
okay.
So more math and science and technology. So I was lucky that there was a good technology program. Didn't necessarily do the I had to do a programming language in my undergrad. Actually, I think I had to do C or something. C++. I don't remember. It's been a long time. It's been 20 some odd years.
Sure.
But I think there was tech involved. I think for me it was like total diversion when I actually started doing the research side of it. Like we had computers in labs and they were the jankiest, oldest, most
Sure.
cobwebbed
Yeah. Yeah.
machines that were duct taped and glued together. So when I went to work at Tufts, they actually had me focusing on the science, technology, and maths departments. And they're like, you understand what they're trying to research and how because you're always adding this weird ad hoc equipment to a computer and you need to read data off of it. So there were like always unique problems. And to me, like they were completely separate, but I understood the technology side. And so when I decided to kind of keep going in tech and I was working around tons of grad students, every grad student was miserable. Like they were miserable. They're all working on their PhDs. They're miserable. I'm like, I'm having fun. I love
Yeah.
my job and I'm working with cool people and my day changes. And I think medicine is different completely, but you have to diagnose a human, which can talk to you, and they can't always talk to you, but usually they communicate. Computers don't talk to you, and I spent my time diagnosing computers. So that was that parallel in terms of my brain working,
Yeah.
but the day-to-day stuff was so different. But I remember just having to diagnose computers and problems, and it's similar to when a patient comes in and goes, "Oh, something hurts,"
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily the origin of the problem. Like you and I have both had running injuries, but it originates from another part in the body, not
Yep.
where the pain is usually, right? And that's you're using the same diagnoses basically in tech when you're trying to troubleshoot hardware.
Yeah, it's like it's problem solving, right? Like I think at the end of the day, in technology, like all we really do is try to solve problems, and the tool that we use might be different depending on what we're trying to accomplish, right? Like, oh, so this
Absolutely.
program language is better for this particular problem, or this technology is better, whatever, right? Um, but we all kind of have like our favorites and the things that like we keep on going back to. Like when did you realize, like first, like what was like the thing in tech that like really resonated with you? And
Mhm.
the second part of that is like when did you realize it was like, the thing? Like, for me, like I liked web stuff because I immediately could make a change like and see it almost instantaneously. So that really resonated with me. Like what was the a similar experience for you?
Um, this is going to sound horrendous when I say it, but
Sure.
and automation was like the thing as an adult, but I was younger and I remember working on networking and network policies and Active Directory. And I remember being able to apply widespread changes and have that impact. So forget like what I was doing, just I was applying changes at a pretty global scope to an organization and impacting how things were working. And I went, oh shit, whatever I do is going to
Yeah.
break or make what's happening. And for some reason, I found that exciting that like
Mm,
I could really break something. And people would know, which was not the good side of it. But
sure.
I think that was exciting. And then as I got a little bit older in my 20s, uh, automation and using PowerShell. And this is going back to like not super long ago, like 2010,
Okay.
2008, somewhere in there. PowerShell 2.0, I think it was 2009. Um, and just I remember just being able to automate stuff, and
Yeah.
that was the game changer. That was the game changer for me. Like, okay, I was doing everything manually. I was making big changes. I was really impacting big organizations with virtualization, data centers. I think when I started moving to data centers, I like the excitement of like being able to build big stacks of servers was really cool and
Yeah.
having this big impact on organizations. Virtualization was a cool change for me. And then automation was the game changer. That's what's turned my career from a hobby thing that I used to get by with to I can automate all the things now. And that's where my career really took off.
Yeah, it is funny. Like I think about this a lot actually about how a developer, like, there's the cliche that like a developer, if they have to do something like 5 times, they're gonna write a script for it, right? And I find it very funny because I have so many like little trivial things that I'm like, oh, like I just do this and it does a bunch of stuff. And like, yeah, I totally agree with the idea of like automation kind of being fascinating. One, because the developer's lazy trope. But also too, like
Yep.
I think there's something that feels really good about knowing that you're kind of saving your future self from having to do something. Like there's, I don't know, what sort of chemical thing, endorphins or dopamine or whatever, but it's like, oh, I don't have to do that anymore because the thing ran this morning, right?
I think it's the menial tasks that are boring to us. You're like,
Yes.
oh, I have to do this every day, or I have to go check on this thing. I hated checking backups. Again, worked
Yeah.
in large data centers. And I used to work for this managed service provider in Boston, Massachusetts. And I was in charge of the backups. And like we're talking for hundreds and hundreds of customers. And tickets would come in when we get notifications. I started automating that and they caught on and they're like, how are you getting through this so quickly
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
efficiently? And
Dangerous
it
though.
was it was a bone of contention because we build by the minute
Mm-hmm.
in 15-minute blocks as a managed service provider. So I had automated my way into a job and we had to do a 15-minute minimum, but I was taking so many 15-minute minimums because I was automating all of this. And they
Mm-hmm.
were just like, we can't tell you no because you've actually solved a lot more problems than you've caused,
Mm-hmm.
but we have to bill the customers. I'm like, well, look, you're billing the customers for time and effort, and it
Yeah.
it it was the first time I had to like really justify like, am I hurting myself by automating stuff? But I became efficient, something I hated.
Yeah.
It was menial tasks that were boring.
That's fascinating, like the idea. And I think that we think about this a lot in tech about how, at the end of the day, like we're doing something for another company to make some money, right? And there's a healthy balance between like, am I doing things that are being like raising efficiencies so the company can make more money, or am I doing things that are causing efficiencies to have the company make less money? Like, and I
Yeah.
think I'm always been of the belief that like time is far more valuable than money. Some people don't believe
Mhm.
that, but um, I find it pretty fascinating that it's like, oh, like I show people that I can automate these things, and I immediately was like, oh no, should I have not done that? Which I think is kind of funny. Like, people should welcome and embrace efficiencies, but I guess not in situations where it's like, oh, like we really expect you to need an hour to do this, and it took you 6 minutes.
I've never the only time I've seen that fire back is when someone's been trying to micromanage a process for them
Yeah.
and like a manager or higher up and they don't understand. And I've seen it where managers have pulled automation scripts and say, well, we want access to this. We don't want you automating stuff.
Mm,
And those are just toxic environments. Um, I, you know, it is helping your future self. And when I worked in engineering at Microsoft for a few years, and we did a lot of projects with customers where we were either refactoring their applications
mm,
and they had to learn a whole new skill set. But then we were helping customers develop new systems, write different types of code, learn new skill sets, and learn DevOps practices and become more efficient. But it is you have to walk before you can run. And I
yeah.
think that's the big thing. And people have to understand that you're adding more tools to your tool belt when you do these things, when you're automating stuff, you're learning DevOps practices, you're learning a new language, you are adding more tools to the tool belt. You never know when it's going to come into play. And I always encourage people to do it. So even if you've automated something for someone and you feel like you're backtracking them, then they're probably in a toxic situation.
Sure.
Um, 99.9% of the time. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's another tool in your toolkit. Even I have lots of tools in my toolkit and I cycle through them. Like sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't. But I've gone into projects where nothing related to something I've done before, but I could take a skill I had previously and go, all right, well, I can use it and apply it to this set of code because I did it over here and let's figure out how to do it in C sharp versus
Sure.
TypeScript or Golang, whatever. And using those skill sets to translate things has been great, even if it wasn't a long term skill.
Yeah, you said something that I find kind of fascinating too about, you start, it's fair to say, I think you started your career kind of on the IT pro sysadministrator side, right? And then you start talking just now about a lot of like developer specific things. You mentioned that you're an engineer, like you start talking about programming languages. When did that transition happen? And the follow up is like, how was it for you? Because some people, they talk a lot about, switching disciplines. It can be kind of painful because your brain is still thinking about things in a particular way, and that's just not the way that the other just thinks.
Yeah, I think one, you have to let down your guard. I think I was fortunate because I learned VB and Basic in school, and I had to do a programming course in university as well. So I had touches of it. It wasn't completely unknown, and I wasn't scared of it. I think a lot of people are scared of it because it's new. And I always have to remind people, like, why did you get into tech? You didn't get into tech to do the same thing every day. If you want to do the same thing every day, go be an accountant, because literally my accountant is the most boring human being I've ever met in my life. Actually, I take that back. I have two accountants, one in each country because I'm a dual citizen. My American accountant is amazing human. So if she's listening, or her husband is at the moment, she's not a boring human. But most other accountants are boring. I just want to backtrack because there are exciting accountants. But literally, we join tech to do exciting things, and we like it because we're learning. So I think for me, it was having touched code before wasn't scary. What was scary for me was everyone watching. So when you're working in a very agile team, you're embracing different practices, like everyone can see your code. So I think the transparency in scripting and coding for me was the switch. And that really happened. I was in a toxic environment. We were sharing scripts, and it was like PowerShell scripts. We were doing stuff with virtualization with VMware. We had all sorts of things happening. And if you wrote little code snippets, people were very possessive over that, like
Yeah.
not an inner source or open source mentality internally at the company. I think for me, it was more coming out of that and going to more of an open source mentality. And that was when I joined Microsoft in 2018. People just shared everything, like anything, like, oh yeah, I got a PowerPoint deck, help with the customer. I've got code, help with that. And when I was on all the engineering teams at Microsoft, it was always sharing and
Yeah.
open and honest. And it was just, it was so cool. And I think that was for me, the flip, not necessarily writing code. Cause I'm like, oh, I can write code. No one's going to see it. But then I became an advocate, and then everyone watches me write code on stage or
Yeah.
on a live stream. And I just had to say, you know what? Screw it. Because I'm not the best developer, but no one is.
Yeah.
Like, you and I know some amazing developers, right? And you can just watch them like smash out some code, and it's mind blowing. But at the end of the day, like, that's fine. Like, I had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I accept it.
Yeah, you said something too, like the idea of sharing, right? Which I think is fascinating. Like you talk to people that are kind of like older, or not older, that's not a fair thing to say, like that have been in tech a bit longer than us. And they talk about like how there was a point in time where you kind of kept like your secret sauce to yourself. Like
Yeah.
we both know Richard Campbell, right? Richard Campbell talks a lot about like the USB drive that had his stuff on it, right? And like, I can't share my stuff because like this is the stuff. And it's yeah,
I can't
exactly.
let it go.
Yeah,
I can't let it
exactly,
go.
right? So it's fascinating to like think about going from that sort of idea and way of thinking to, oh, I have a script here, use it. Or here's a GitHub
Yeah.
repo, like use this repo, right? You know, and that kind of leads into like this idea of like open source that I find is kind of interesting. It's like, first, like when did open source like first come across like your eyes as something that, oh, like this is kind of cool. And then like when, like how quickly were you to like embrace that idea where it's like, okay, everything I'm just gonna just throw out there, and if people look at it, cool, and people might not like it, people might love it, doesn't matter, but I'm just throwing it out there.
I remember consuming some open source software, doing a lot of Linux work back in 2008. I started getting really heavy into some Linux, like server platforms, and a lot of customers doing open source projects in the enterprise state. I didn't do a lot of fun projects, and I remember building out some stuff in my own home lab in probably about, again, 2006, 2008. And probably 2006, I really started embracing open source for myself. And then
Mm,
2008, I saw it really more in the enterprise, which I thought was really cool. But my companies that I was working at were not as open source friendly. Um, and I think a lot of it is because we were dealing with customer data in the type of companies I was working in. And then when I worked for a larger company, like toxic environment, again,
yeah.
like no one shared anything. I actually the other day found my folder of PowerShell scripts from 2008, 2010. I found it. I was like, do I put this on GitHub and share it with the world? But they're pretty terrible. Like it would make for a great laugh. And I think, and then when I started like seeing other people share stuff, I was scared to be vulnerable. Like I was
Sure.
scared for people to comment on my code. I was scared for people to rip me apart. I would say most people come with good intent in the open source community. Most, like the internet, there's good in the world, there's bad in the world. Be the good.
Yeah.
But I think in the open source communities, there's a few people that just kind of rip you apart, and and those people need to like get out because
Sure.
that's not conducive to people learning. So I think most of the time people are really good at learning, contributing to projects. Um, I contribute to some open source stuff now for fun, which I think's awesome when I have time. But a lot of the customers I work with are all consuming open source now, some kind of open source product. So it's a hot topic, which talks us into then how doing inner source. And because I've been in companies that have done nothing to companies that work in a very inner source way, it's because I've been on that journey. It's such an easy way to talk about your life experiences because you have so many of them. But I think, yeah, it's scary to be vulnerable. But if you're in a great community around you, and I always tell people like pick a repository. You got to pick a thing that interests you
Yeah.
and go with it. Don't just pick any old project. If it doesn't interest you, you're not going to do it. If you find something that interests you, go, you know what? Home Assistant. I always tell people like, do you have anything automated in your house? Do you use Home Assistant? Great place to get started
Mhm.
to work on different stuff. Um, a lot of like my hobbies and activities have some open source stuff out on GitHub. And I'm like, oh wow, I can have a look at their code base. I can take a look. I can contribute. And I do. And I do take some of my hobbies and write code for some of those repositories and contribute. And it could be something small. It could just be a README doc. And I always tell people like start with a README doc. Start with the documentation. Like if you didn't understand it or there's something you missed onboarding into a project, probably the other 90% of people had same questions that just no one brought it up. So start with a README doc, start with documentation, and start contributing something, and then do little code snippets. You don't have to do anything crazy and big, just an idea, suggestion.
Yeah, and even to kind of extend that statement is like, okay, well, if you don't feel comfortable like writing code, like if you ask any open source maintainer, like, hey, do you need help with docs? Do you need help with
Yeah.
testing? Like, not very many people are gonna say, oh yeah, no, we don't want people to write docs.
We
Like,
don't want
yeah, we
documentation.
don't want people to write docs. Like even the ones that like are kind of like let's be real. Like there's some gatekeeping in open source, right? There's some very large projects out there. They're like, oh, you need to follow this very very strict code of contribution. And if you don't, like, you're just not welcome here. I mean
Yeah.
that's totally fine. Like if that's their process to kind of make themselves, um, you, prevent themselves having to deal with some pain of having to deal with tons and tons of contributions. That's fine. But if you ask those folks still, like, oh, do you want somebody to like write like this doc like on this thing that like isn't really well documented? I have a hard time seeing anybody saying like no. Like you might have like a
Yeah.
writing guide or style guide that they want you to follow, but like at the end of the day, like people want free work.
Yes.
So
We want your contribution.
yeah, that's why I think things like Hacktoberfest is so funny to me because you'll see
Mhm.
people flying around like doing like random PRs to do like to fixing like typos in docs, which I
Yep.
which I really appreciate. But it's like, are we doing this because you want to contribute, or are you doing it because like some big company is like, oh, if you have X amount of PRs merged, like you get like a sticker, which
Yes. We want the badge.
but I think like you deal with a little bit of pain to get the good thing, right? The good thing
Yeah.
is that everybody's
Absolutely.
contributing to open source. Some people are trying to gamify, which if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do.
Yeah. That's their MO. But yeah, I think contributing is good. And no one says no to documentation. Like documentation
Sure.
is something we all struggle on. And I actually think where I've been most successful in the blogs I've written have been in a really simple problem I've solved. Sometimes less simple, but I documented it, put it into a blog, and those have been my highest points of success. How did I solve a problem for a customer? White labeled it, so kept the customer name out, kept all the identifying information out, and those blogs till today, like I still get people contacting me
Yeah.
like, how did you do this? How did you do that? And it was a simple fix. And if you could just communicate that to people, that is a great way to share your knowledge. And that's why documentation is crucial. Because if one person's had the problem, a lot of other people have. And it's crazy looking at some of the stats. I never thought when I wrote a blog people would actually want to read it.
Yeah.
But other people have the same problems. So yeah, they
Oh,
do.
I have a story around that. Like, first off, I don't enjoy writing like blogs or like documentation because I have some imposter syndrome about my writing. I don't have very great vocabulary. And I struggle with like I think that my writing isn't that great, so I don't really do it very often. But I tried a few years ago to really push myself to write, and I would just like you saying, I'd pick like an area of like, oh, I want to learn this, and then I would write a blog on it. And I wrote a blog. This is before I joined Microsoft years ago, where I was studying for an exam, like one of the Microsoft certification exams. So I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna write a blog, like outlining like what I did to study for this exam. And I tell you what, April, the amount of views that stupid blog post got, like to the point like where I eventually took it down because I stopped. Like, there's no point for me to blog that exists. That like the last blog post was from 5 years ago, so I just kind of made it disappear. Um, Also, I think the certification that it was for like doesn't exist anymore, but that doesn't matter. But like we're talking just insane amount of views every single month, and I'm like, who are these people that are like? I'm guessing because it came up like top in a search result, so people are just clicking on
Yeah.
it constantly.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think that's what really resonates with me about content and like creating content in general is that I don't really look at numbers hardly ever. One, because it's not great for my ego. My ego's already too big, so looking at numbers isn't really a good thing. Um, but you'll see like comments or you'll look at numbers occasionally, and you're like, who are these people that are looking at all this stuff? So and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts as somebody that is far more visible than I am. When you create content, like the numbers are even probably more silly. Like, what is that initial feeling? Or let's actually take a step back to like that first feeling when you started creating content and you realize like, oh, like lots of people look at this stuff. Like, why do they look at this stuff? Like, what does your brain react? How does your brain react to that?
I think my brain imploded. Like my brain actually imploded, and it was 2019 was my first ever video
Mm,
that I did, and I actually with Abel Wang on the DevOps lab.
sure.
Flew out to Seattle, recorded in Redmond in the Microsoft Channel 9 studios, and we recorded it. And I want to say like a month and a half, 2 months later, it went live. So I'd been out in Seattle. I was really excited, and I remember recording the video, and I over prepared. Abel was like, just give me bullet points of what you're going to talk about. Like, no big deal. I gave him a full script like 8 times over. I kept editing it. I over engineered it, but I was so nervous. And
Sure.
at the
Yeah.
time of, I remember doing the recording, I was definitely speaking too fast because I'm really good at that. And I'm like, no one's going to watch this. I'm just excited to be here with Abel
Yeah.
recording a video and
Yeah.
talking and not looking like an idiot. That's my goal. Like I can't screw this up. Um, I kind of screwed it up because I did all my demos with Bash, and I met Jeffrey Snover, the creator of PowerShell, that same day. Abel's like, "Oh, let's go have lunch with Jeffrey." I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Exactly.
So I had to admit to Jeffrey I didn't use PowerShell. So that was like a defining moment for me to never not use PowerShell again.
Sure.
But I remember doing the recording and just having like just fun doing it. That was it.
Yeah.
Like I was stressed, but I was having fun. And then when the video got released, I was literally getting on an airplane to go to Austria on vacation for a race. And I remember the tweet coming out from Abel, and I just like I started like crying happy tears.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, I have a video on YouTube. And then like it kept getting retweeted. And I remember like 100 retweets, 1,000 retweets, and like it just exploded. And I'm like, who the hell wants to listen to me? And
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
like then Abel invited me back to do another one. And then I ended up hosting the show. So um, it my brain imploded. I didn't think that many people would watch it. I think to date that video's had like 70,000 views.
Yeah.
I think that's insane in my brain.
Yeah.
Um, I think when you create content, it's about timing.
Mm-hmm.
It's about creating the content that interests you, but other people are asking. Like I remember the way this content came up was I was working with customers, and they're all asking about Terraform, and I'm like, oh, I love Terraform. I was playing with it, and then I started learning how to use it in the enterprise space, and it snowballed for me into obviously automation, infrastructure as code, and it was an easy win for me with customers getting them into the cloud and transforming their apps and their data centers. And I just remember like, why are people reading this? And it was really weird. I think the next thing that got me was like talking to you at one point or getting on a call with someone else like, oh yeah, I've seen your video. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
just freezing.
Yeah.
And I was like, what do you mean you've seen my video? And I think that's like the second time your head implodes. But even till today, like when I'm at a conference or I was at a customer thing and I met a few folks and they're like, we watch all of your videos. Like, it's mind blowing that people actually watch my videos still.
Sure.
And it's very humbling. Um, I love that I can impact people and affect them in a really positive way and teach them something, hopefully, and share my knowledge. But it's still mind blowing. And I'm always happy if one person learns something from content I put out there. So it is hard to look the numbers. Like, I did a blog that didn't get a lot of views, but a bunch of people were like, "Oh wow, we're really excited to see
Yeah.
this." So the views don't really matter. It's more like, did I help someone today?
Yeah.
But it is mind blowing when people are like, "Oh yeah, I read your blog." I'm like, "You did? Someone? Why would you read that?"
Yeah, it's still very strange for me, like when there's two examples, and by no means I'm not trying to say like look how famous I am, but it's one of those things where there's two examples that really I don't understand. One, I'll be somewhere like at like I'll be at a conference in Germany, and somebody will walk up to me and says, "Hey, I like your podcast," or "I really like your videos on YouTube," and I'm like, "What?" Like, nobody watches, like, nobody cares, like, but this person went out of their way to like come up to me and say hey and want to take a picture with me and like all that stuff, right? And that doesn't that really messes with my brain. And then the next one is when I meet somebody who I have like a ton of respect for, and I meet them in person or I'll convince them to be on this show, and they're like, "Oh, it's so nice to finally meet you, like I've been following your stuff for a while." And I immediately go, "What?" Like,
Yeah,
what?
yeah,
Like, you know, I know who you are. You're not supposed to know who I am. That's not how this thing works. Um,
yeah,
but I think one of the things that has really helped me with this is that like we're all just people, and some people have a
yeah.
bigger platform than others. And I think at the end of the day, I've not met very many people that are just kind of dicks or like assholes, like at all. Like everybody's really
I've
nice, and
met a
I
couple.
think, huh?
I've met a
Oh,
couple.
sure. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah.
no,
Anyway,
most people are just human and they're normal and they're super
yeah, and I
nice.
think also too, like especially like in the circle that we are both in, like people that like to speak at conferences or what have you, right? Like there's a very specific kind of personality, and it's somebody who is very, very passionate about technology. That's what the reason why I tell people before I start the show, like the whole reason why I do this show is so I can talk to other people for an hour about what they find interesting about tech. Um,
Yeah.
because it's fun. Like it's super
Yep.
fun to talk about tech with people that love tech as much as I do or we do. Um, and one of the things that I don't know if you would call this kind of your bread and butter or like area of focus, and you mentioned it a little bit, is like the DevOps stuff, right?
Mhm.
And knowing your background now that you kind of went through, like you did that the IT pro system administrator stuff, you went to dev work, and like if you really talk about DevOps, it's kind of like those two things mirroring each other. Like yeah, Donovan has like his quote that is like the quote, right? Um,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, like it's very much this Venn diagram of like IT pro responsibilities and dev responsibilities together. I'd love to kind of get your first off, like when did you realize like DevOps was a thing and how much you loved it? And then I just let's just talk from there because I mean I think of you as like one of like the de facto like DevOps folk to follow around to get more content around that, right? So I'd love to kind of hear your introduction into DevOps.
Um, I think it goes back to automation. And I remember sitting in a meeting trying to deploy a massive application to our environment back in, we'll go 2010. Um, and I probably had heard the word DevOps, really no. And I remember having the arguments about everyone throwing everything over the fence and literally everyone under the bus. We had very blameful postmortems, not blameless. Like,
Mm,
I was like, there has to be a better way. And I
okay.
remember just hearing it, living it, breathing it. And I think I actually went home and cried that night because we had this multi-million-dollar project that was going down the tubes and people were just throwing each other under the bus. And I had always been responsible to go into a data center, deploy an application, to do a thing. It was on me. Then the team started getting bigger and transforming a bit more. Um, and I just remember there being a better way. And I think it wasn't until probably 2013 that DevOps became known to me. And I
Yeah.
was like, I have this thing, it's automation, a thing, but it's not DevOps. And I'm like, it's DevOps. I hated the buzzword, but it just became a thing. And I just remember finding better ways of working. I remember learning about what a scrum master was. And I was like, why are we using all these rugby terms?
Sure,
And
sure.
just, going through my training and like actually living and breathing it. And then I finally went and got certified. But it was just like, there is a better way out there. And I knew there had to be. And it was the hours and days of frustration of deploying software that I literally was like, I physically can't do this anymore. Like I'm up for 72 hours. I'm exhausted. The arguments that ensued, the blame games, and that's actually when I made a life change and moved to the UK. Like I got fed up with the blame games, the arguments, the long work weeks, and it was part of my lifestyle change. And then I really embraced DevOps, and I was like, hold on, I'm doing more in the cloud. I started in 2013. I really started embracing Azure in the early days,
Hmm.
and that's when DevOps became part of my every single day. And I was working for a smaller company and trying to instill some DevOps practices. They fought it. I moved on to another company. They fought it. Um, but it was, still trying to win the war, I guess, one slow step at a time. So the cloud was definitely the game changer for me. And
Yeah.
I don't mean just like, I mean the public cloud like Azure. And even working in data centers for a long time deploying applications, like I worked for a company that took 4 days to deploy a server, a virtual
Yeah.
machine.
Yeah.
4 days. 4 days. Hi. Yeah, I can do that in like a couple minutes and automate the crap out of it. They wouldn't let me automate it. And I had to move on in my career at that point because I just literally just
Sure.
couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it. But that was, it was beating my head against the wall repeatedly. And, there's a quote around doing the same thing, the same behaviors and expecting a different
Hmm.
outcome.
Yeah.
And I remember that. And I think my mother actually gave me that like lecture one time because it was about something else. And then it clicked. I was like, there's a better way to do things. And I had to change my job. But I started really embracing the DevOps practices and understanding it, reading books about it. Um, and that was it. That was it for me. Just like, yeah, I've lived and breathed this now. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty fast. Like one, I plus one to everything you said. Like been in the job trying to convince people that this thing was important, and dealing with the pain of like cab reviews when you try to do software deployments and all that sort of great stuff. Um, and it's funny that you say like that, like till to this day, there's people that still are a bit apprehensive about it, right? When like especially like in our world, like it just makes so much sense that when you run
Mhm.
into situations where it doesn't make sense for a particular company, you get very confused because it's like, why would you put up with the pain? Like there might be some pain like implementing this practice in your organization, but like you're saving yourself pain in the future. And some people have a hard time kind of seeing that far out. But I'd like to kind of close the conversation. You know, DevOps is a few years old now, and we've kind of started to go through like transitions of like this same concept, but it's took over different terms. Like there was this SRE was a big kind of push, which it was kind of like a piece of it, and now we're into this platform engineering thing, and now AI is involved in all of this stuff. I'd love to kind of, as we wrap up, I'd love to see get your thoughts on like not talking about DevOps in particular, but like tech is changing, right?
Right.
What are some of the things that you see that could be positives coming as like, okay, like I see all these things and I see this good coming. Like I'd love to kind of get your thoughts as like what is coming that you're excited about.
I'm going to talk about AI for a second because it's a
Sure.
scary topic for a lot of people. I think a lot of
Yep.
people are, there's definitely the sense of fear. I remember like first experimenting with it. I'm like, I'm gonna be out of a job. But we said this about automation. We said
Yep.
about virtualization. We said about cloud native transformation. We said it with every big change. And AI is kind of the newest wave, if you will. Um, there's a couple things with AI that actually really excite me. One is I struggle to get started. Literally give
Mm,
me, I'm going to open up VS Code, blank slate, start a project. I will sit there and be like, yep, more coffee, more coffee.
sure. Yeah.
How do I start? Um, the thing I love about AI is it's a starter for 10. I'll throw out some ideas. I don't like what it outputs. I'll throw out more ideas, reword it, give it different context, and it goes, oh, now there's an idea, and I'll pick
Yep.
bits. Then I can start writing code. Then I can get started on a project. I love the ability of it to get you started. That
Yeah.
is for me great. I like that I can automate some menial, take some of the menial tasks off. some of the new stuff that's coming out in helping with communication and collaboration, being a DevOps person, I love. So, really great example. Born in the US, live in the UK. I always tell people I speak two languages, American and really bad British English. But they are spelled differently. You want to know a
Yeah.
bad day? Spell something with a Z, an S instead of a Z, a Z,
Hmm.
in code. That will break your code for 8 hours or more. I've worked with so many colleagues that have used British spellings, but
Sure.
it should be an American spelling. And I think because I work so much in Europe, almost every person I work with, English is a second language, but
Yep.
they're coding in English. And I have so much respect for that. But the way in which we communicate is so different and really hard. And people are hard, right? Like we're trying to communicate across different cultures, different languages, and the way someone from England will word something versus an American, or someone from Germany versus a British person. The wording's
Hmm.
completely and the context is different. So some of the things we're doing around communication collaboration is fantastic. I think absolutely. I actually wrote a blog today on a new thing that GitHub has released called GitHub Models to hook into the APIs and start training with different models. And you can experiment with your type of code
Yep.
base, and the ability to actually customize your code to you and to what your needs are is getting really cool. So I think the customization piece is awesome. But I think AI, we're still driving, and where I'm using it, it's a starter for 10, but I'm still having to make the decisions as the human. I'm still architecting because I love architecting. I love finding that problem and creating that solution. AI is helping me execute it. So I'm a lot less scared of it now, and a lot less being like not very much. But I love how it helps me focus on the problem solving bits, and it helps me execute it and a lot faster as well. A lot faster. It's a huge time saver.
I also like, you know, one thing that I love about some of these tools that are now out there is like it just completely accelerates like the learning experience too. Like I probably have said this a thousand times on the show at some point, and if not, like, so I have a kid who's 8 years old who wants to get into like coding. Like they like Minecraft,
Mhm.
they whatever, right? So like they want to learn Python. So I'm like, okay, so let's learn some Python and open up VS Code on their laptop, and I just start typing in like, you know, using comments, and like GitHub Copilot will start to like write code based on the comments. And my kid can literally like, they don't know all the syntax for Python. They don't know all the different pieces, and they understand the concepts of writing software because I've taught them to an extent. But they say like, "Oh, I want a for loop that does this." And then Copilot will give them a for loop,
Mhm.
and they just continue on down the line. And I think for somebody who's getting started in tech, trying to learn a new language or learn new technology, like what do we have to do 5 years ago? We would go to Google or Bing or Yahoo or whatever the search engine of choice is. We would type, how do I do a for loop in JavaScript? And then
Yep.
we would
And we
copy that
copy someone
code.
else's code.
Yeah, we'd copy that code from, I mean, yeah, we'd copy that code from Stack Overflow or from the JavaScript docs or whatever.
Yep.
And you kind of break out of that context. You know, like the
Mhm.
phrase that I always hear is like, you lose your flow. My kid
Yep.
doesn't have a flow yet, but they're not having to like go and use another tool to get the answer to their question. Tool is
And they're keeping
embedded.
interest
Yeah.
longer as well.
Yeah.
Kids are definitely keeping interest longer as well. Same with
So
adults.
yeah, it's exciting because there are times like, you know, I don't know Bash very well, but I'm doing stuff in Linux all the time. The amount of times that I can literally just like, I need a Bash command that literally loops through a folder and does some stuff, and it gives me the line.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, it's problem solved.
Great.
Go about my day. So I see there's tons of opportunity to. We talked about this a bit earlier with automation. It's, you know, getting rid of those tasks that we don't want to do, right?
Yep.
And you know, it's not a, oh, this is going. You said pretty plainly, it's not going to replace my job. It's going to let me do the things that I want to do instead of having to
Yep.
do these things. So like, you know, automation, AI, like those two things being married together is super exciting. I'd love to, one of the last things I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on is in tech, where these concepts are changing constantly. And I'd love to, you know, as a way to part, like, what is the way that you stay current or relevant, like with your learning? Like, how is the best way that April learns new things? Is it using like a GitHub Copilot? Is it looking at docs? Is it watching videos? Is it all of the above?
It's all of the above. I love to do things, so I will literally pick up. So I was actually learning with a new thing today, a new feature. Picked it up, looked at it, and I just actually looked at it and started pushing buttons, going, "Where does this take me? Let's go on a
Yeah.
journey." And then I went and read the docs on some other things, and the docs weren't amazing, actually. So I started writing documentation around the docs to help fix the docs, because if I'm going, right, I've never done this. How's everyone else feeling? So I started taking notes on it and writing up kind of a how to as well. But it's just doing, and then by doing we learn, and then we find other gotchas and caveats. But yeah, I use a mix of the documents and doing it, and then other times like I like working with others, but I think sometimes when we work with others, they go off on a tangent or they go down a path, and it's tough to kind of like follow along. So I like to go at my own pace most of the time and just do it. If I can
Yeah.
do it, I can find all the holes and the gotchas, and maybe that's where our customers are gonna have the same holes and gotchas as well.
I think that's a really a solid way to think about it too. It's like, I try to put my feet in the shoes of people that are learning new things. Like I'm an old dog. I don't like learning things very well. Like I force myself to learn new things and I try to stay away from, oh, I'm going to use like the tools that I know and love because it's easier for me. I want to learn something new because it's the only way that I'm going to be better at what I do. And I think what's really important, and I think you kind of relate to this as well. It's like we're in a field where like we get access to kind of like the sexy new thing all the time.
Yep.
And if you don't get excited about like playing with the sexy new things, like I don't know if we're in the right field, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So,
But I still use the tools that I love when I can. And if the
yes.
new cool toy is ready to be used, I will use it. Um,
How
but
patient are you with the tools that that aren't ready?
um, not very.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it depends. Like if something's not ready or it has limitations, I'm happy to give feedback to the product group if they're looking for feedback. If I have to, and I'll be really honest with this and transparent, if I have to create a video on something that breaks, like the words that come out of my mouth will not be repeated in public because they're not
Sure.
healthy.
Sure.
That's where I lose the patience, because it's like time sensitive, right?
Yeah.
But when something doesn't work right and I'm not under time pressure to produce a video or something, I'm happy to give the feedback or to figure it out. And that is a rabbit hole I'll go down. But yeah, I think a lot of
Yeah.
times when something doesn't work, or sometimes I have to take a step back and go, it's not ready yet,
Yeah.
and give the feedback. But I think giving the feedback is the most critical thing. Give the
So,
feedback. Um, yeah,
so you're able to have a little bit of empathy, right? Which I think is because
absolutely.
you see this a lot, like especially in this world today, where people, not to blame my generation, the millennial generation, where it's like we want the answers and we want the accuracy, we want all the information like right now. We're entitled to it. Um, so when things don't work the way you want, like I'm very guilty of getting very irate at some technology that's not doing exactly what I think it should be doing. But then I take a step back and I'm like, okay, well, the people that are working on this are just human beings. Some of them are brilliant. Some of them probably don't like what they're doing. Um, so understanding that, and also just understanding like the amount of absolute nonsense that people have to put up with to like ship
Yes,
products, which I think a
yes,
lot
it's
of
hard.
people kind of miss out on. Like if you don't see how the sausage gets made, you really don't appreciate how good it tastes.
Yes, and I think that's a lot of where I've spent my time talking about how GitHub builds GitHub with GitHub, or Microsoft builds products, and people that are
Mm-hmm.
delivering products to customers and end users. You have to have empathy because they're frustrated because you've changed a thing, you've changed a feature, you've changed something. um, you have to have some empathy. So you have to make it the best possible experience for them. And when I'm not under a time pressure for delivery, and we get customers that are under pressure to get things, and I do get it, especially if you're in the middle of a project. And there's money on the line. Like I
Sure.
absolutely
Yeah.
get that. But I think it's important to give the feedback and have empathy for people delivering the software, and just be kind. Be kind to people. That's the underlying theme.
Yeah, I think I mean know the answer to this question because you just said it, but I'll ask it anyway. So like we've been talking about kind of your progression through technology, kind of being able to balance these different areas of focus or these different disciplines, right? And getting to the point now where you're able to do things that you really enjoy doing and having fun while doing it. And one of the question that I have for you is like if you can think about your career in tech open source, automation, all of the things that we've just talked about for the last hour, like what sort of feeling do you get? Like, what is the thing that comes to mind?
I'm out of feelings today. Like,
Oh
I think I'm
no.
out.
Oh no. It is,
Yeah,
for
no,
what it's worth,
no,
we're recording this and it is a bit late where April is.
no, it's okay.
Like
I genuinely have
she needs
empathy.
to go to bed and take a nap or something. Right?
It is my nap time. No, genuinely empathy. And I say this because when I've shipped a solution for in a project previously, we tried to open source it. So maintaining it is hard.
Hmm.
Um, and and that's the problem. Like the technology is moving so fast, we have to leave that thing and go on to the next one. People are like, we want you to
Yep.
maintain it. I'm like, yeah, that's 5 years old or 3 years old, and the new thing's out, and there's a new way of doing it. That's the
Yep.
hardest part. Have the empathy, and I think there's only so many hours in a day, right? And we
Yep.
have to say no to things, and that's where the empathy comes in for others. And people have families and lives
Mhm.
and things. I have sleep, coming up soon, I hope. But it's I'm not going to sacrifice to get 2 hours of sleep just to hang out with you, Isaac. As much fun as this is, um,
Hint,
I'm
hint,
getting
finish
older, and
up, Isaac.
I value my sleep. I do.
Yeah.
It's older age. It's like I like my 6 to 7 hours now. I can't survive off less. But
Yeah.
no,
No,
it's having empathy for others without question.
well, I appreciate your time. And I think the
Thank you for
things
having me.
that it's been great to chat with you. Like it's always great to chat with you. But to learn a little bit more about your story and how it's got to where you are and the fun things that you're getting to do. It's inspiring for me. But I appreciate your time because it is getting a bit late. So for the folks that aren't following April, I highly recommend not just for the tech stuff, but also the other stuff too, because the scuba diving, the triathlon stuff, like you're a hoot.
Thank
You're entertaining in
you.
all the different facets. But
Great.
if you aren't, but if you're following her, I highly recommend it. One of the places you can find her is on Twitter. So that's the April Yoho. So TheAprilYoho, and there'll also be some links to some other places you can find her show notes. Before we sign off, my friend, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Go forth and write good code. That's
Oh
it.
man, that's good.
Yeah.
That's not yours, is it? You stole that from someone?
I have no idea, actually.
Okay,
Uh,
well,
I,
that's
I've,
quoted
I've been saying it for so long.
trademark April Yoho.
We'll
Go
take
forth
that.
and
Put that on the
code.
t-shirt.
So good. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in with us right now and for the folks listening in the future. So this is Isaac Levin from Coffee and Open Source, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. For my friend April, take care.